My life was a museum of my own making, a quiet, climate-controlled space where everything had its place. I was the curator and the sole exhibit, a man meticulously arranged behind velvet ropes of routine and self-protection. My apartment was a testament to this philosophy. Books were organized by color and then author, my coffee mugs were aligned with military precision, and the minimalist furniture was positioned at perfect 90-degree angles. This order was not a preference, it was a defense mechanism. It was the wall I built, brick by silent brick, to keep the unpredictable chaos of the world and of other people at a safe distance. My job as a graphic designer fed this need for control. I spent my days imposing order on chaos, aligning pixels, choosing harmonious color palettes, and creating clean, logical layouts from the messy tangle of a client's brief. It was solitary work, a conversation between me, my screen, and the quiet hum of my computer. It was safe. It was predictable. It was profoundly lonely. And then there was Julian Vance. He was the chaotic masterpiece that had been mistakenly hung in my quiet gallery. As the founder and lead architect of the firm where I worked, he was an unavoidable presence, a force of nature that disrupted the sterile air of the office every time he walked through the door. Julian was built on a different scale than other men. He was tall, with shoulders that seemed to carry the weight of his ideas without effort, and he moved with a grounded certainty that I could only envy. His voice was a low rumble, a sound that vibrated through the floorboards and settled deep in my chest, a stark contrast to the quiet clicks of my keyboard. He was a creature of texture and scent in my world of smooth, odorless surfaces. He smelled of crisp linen, expensive soap, and something else, something warm and organic like sawdust or old paper, a scent that spoke of creation and tangible things. He was, in every conceivable way, the opposite of my curated existence. He was also my boss. This fact was the thick, shatterproof glass between me and the exhibit. It was the ultimate barrier, the uncrossable line that made any thought beyond professional admiration a form of self-torture. To compound the impossibility, there was the casual way he moved through the world, an ease that I interpreted as a life filled with things I couldn't comprehend. Weekend trips I'd hear snippets of, mentions of a friend named Sarah who seemed to be a recurring character in his off-hours narrative. I concluded, with the grim certainty of a practiced pessimist, that he was straight. He existed in a different universe, one with different rules and different expectations. He was unattainable. So I did what I always did with beautiful, impossible things. I turned him into art. I observed him from a distance, cataloging the details of his existence with the detached precision of a scholar. My mind became a secret catalog, a private collection dedicated to the study of Julian Vance. I knew the exact shade of blue of the chambray shirt he wore on Tuesdays, a color that made the gray of his eyes seem deeper, more thoughtful. I knew the way he'd push his glasses up the bridge of his nose with one finger when he was concentrating, a small, unconscious gesture that made my stomach tighten. I could have written a dissertation on the sound of his laugh, a rare, unguarded thing that usually happened when he was on the phone, a deep, warm sound that made the air in the office feel suddenly charged. I memorized the small constellation of lines that appeared at the corners of his eyes when he gave a genuine smile, not the polite, professional smile he used with clients, but the real one. I tracked the cadence of his footsteps as he walked down the hall, a steady, confident rhythm that was as familiar to me as my own heartbeat. I would watch him lean over a junior designer's desk, his large frame bent in a gesture of gentle instruction, his presence a bubble of warmth and quiet authority. In those moments, a painful, hopeless yearning would ache in my chest, a hollow feeling that echoed in the empty spaces of my carefully ordered life. He was a masterpiece, and I was just the quiet guard in the corner of the room, forever watching, forever separate. The disruption, when it came, arrived in a deceptively mundane email. The subject line read, "Presentation, Sterling Corporation." For weeks, the entire firm had been consumed by this project, a massive pitch for a new urban development project. It was the kind of account that could define a company for a decade. Julian had been the architect of the vision, and I had been its visual translator, spending countless late nights crafting the presentation, ensuring every slide, every render, every font choice was perfect. The email was from Julian's assistant. It confirmed the travel details. A flight to Seattle, just two of us. Julian would present the architectural vision, and I would be there to manage the visuals and answer any design-specific questions. My stomach twisted into a knot of pure, unadulterated anxiety. 2 days. 48 hours of proximity to the one person who could dismantle my defenses without even trying. It felt less like a business trip and more like a sentence. The airport was a symphony of controlled chaos, a place I normally navigated with grim efficiency. But with Julian beside me, every mundane detail was amplified. The scent of his subtle cologne cut through the sterile air. The way he handed our tickets to the agent with an easy smile, the low murmur of his voice as he confirmed our seats, it was all part of the exhibit, now brought to life and moving right beside me. I clutched my laptop bag like a shield, my knuckles white. I've never enjoyed flying. It is the ultimate loss of control, a surrender to physics and machinery that my anxious mind rebels against. As we settled into our seats, the close quarters felt suffocating. His arm brushed against mine on the shared armrest, and a jolt, hot and sharp, shot through me. I pulled my arm away as if I'd been burned, tucking it tightly against my side. He didn't seem to notice, already absorbed in his notes. The plane took off, and for the first hour, a fragile truce settled between us. We worked in a comfortable silence, the quiet hum of the engines a backdrop to the clicks of our keyboards. I almost allowed myself to believe I could survive this. Then the sky turned on us. The first lurch was sudden, a violent drop that stole the air from my lungs and sent my stomach into my throat. The seatbelt sign chimed, a frantic, electronic warning. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom, a strained attempt at calm, mentioning unexpected and severe weather patterns. But his words were swallowed by another jarring shudder that shook the plane from nose to tail. My carefully constructed composure didn't just crack, it shattered. My breathing became shallow, my palms slick with cold sweat. I squeezed my eyes shut, my knuckles white as I gripped the armrests. The world outside the small window was a churning gray void. The plane felt like a toy in the hands of an angry god, tossed and battered with relentless fury. A warm, heavy pressure suddenly covered my hand. My eyes snapped open. It was Julian's hand, his large, steady hand completely enveloping mine where it was clenched on the armrest. He wasn't looking at me. He was staring straight ahead, his jaw tight, but his thumb was making slow, calming circles on the back of my hand. The gesture was so unexpected, so grounding, that it cut through the rising tide of my panic. "Just breathe, Elias," he said, his voice a low rumble just beside my ear, barely audible over the roar of the engines and the storm. "It's just air pockets. We're fine." His words were a lifeline. I focused on the solid weight of his hand, the rhythmic stroke of his thumb, and forced my lungs to obey. In, out. The plane dropped again, and my grip on his hand tightened instinctively, but this time, the fear was tempered by the anchor of his touch. The ordeal felt like it lasted an eternity. When the captain's voice returned, it carried a note of weary relief. The storm was too severe to push through. We were being diverted to a small regional airport in a city I'd never heard of. We would land in 20 minutes. The relief that washed over me was quickly replaced by a new kind of anxiety. Stranded, in the middle of nowhere. With Julian. The landing was rough, but we were on solid ground. As we deplaned into the tiny, overwhelmed terminal, it became clear we weren't the only diverted flight. The small building was a chaotic sea of stranded travelers. A quick search on our phones confirmed the worst. A local folk festival was happening this weekend. Every hotel room within a 50-mile radius was booked solid. Every single one. Except, Julian finally declared after a long and frustrating phone call, for a single cancellation. One room. At a place called the Pine Creek Motel. He looked at me, his expression a mixture of apology and exhaustion. "It has one bed," he said, the words hanging in the air between us, heavy with implication. It's that or the airport floor. My meticulously ordered world had officially been thrown into a blender. There was no choice. There was only the quiet drive in a rented car, the looming reality of the night ahead, and the ghost of his hand still tingling on mine. The Pine Creek Motel was exactly what it sounded like. A low, single-story building with a flickering neon sign that cast a sad, pinkish glow on the damp asphalt. Our room was small, clean, but overwhelmingly intimate. It smelled of pine-scented cleaner and old wood. The space was dominated by a single queen-sized bed, its floral bedspread a testament to a bygone decade. The air was thick with a silence that felt louder than the storm had been. We moved around the small space with a stilted, awkward choreography, a dance of two people trying desperately not to occupy the same square foot of carpet at the same time. I put my bag down by the window. He placed his on the small luggage rack. Our eyes met for a fleeting second before we both looked away, as if acknowledging the shared space was too much to bear. Every sense I possessed was dialed to its maximum frequency, and every signal was tuned to Julian. The room, which had been anonymous moments before, was now being filled with the scent of him, that clean, soapy smell mixed with the faint, warm scent of his skin and the wool of his sweater. It was an invasion, a colonization of my personal space that was both terrifying and intoxicating. When he took off his jacket and hung it on the back of the door, the small room seemed to shrink, becoming even more saturated with his presence. I could hear the soft whisper of his clothes as he moved, the quiet sigh he let out as he sat on the edge of the bed to take off his shoes. I found myself tracking the rhythm of his breathing, a slow, steady counterpoint to the frantic hammering of my own heart. The world had compressed to the four walls of this room, and he was its unshakable center of gravity. We ordered room service from the motel's limited menu, 2 club sandwiches and 2 beers, a sad little feast for 2 stranded travelers. We ate sitting at a tiny, wobbly table, our knees occasionally brushing against each other, each accidental contact sending a fresh jolt of electricity through my system. The conversation was stilted, focused on safe, neutral topics. The rescheduled presentation, the logistics of getting a flight out in the morning, the absurdity of the situation. But underneath the polite chatter, a different conversation was happening, one of unspoken tension and hyper-awareness. He offered me the first shower, a gesture of kindness that felt monumental. While the water drummed against the fiberglass stall, I stood in the main room, just listening, my mind painting a vivid, unwanted picture of him on the other side of the thin door. When I took my turn, I saw his dop kit on the small bathroom counter next to my own. It was a simple black leather bag, but seeing it there, his personal items just inches from mine, felt like a profound breach of the professional boundary that had always separated us. It was a small, intimate detail from his life, and it made the walls of my museum feel perilously thin. Later, as we prepared for the impossible task of sleeping, the room was cast in the dim, soft glow of a single bedside lamp. The confident, authoritative shell of Julian Vance, my boss, had begun to crack. He was sitting on his side of the bed, his back against the headboard, looking out the window at the rain-streaked darkness. "I hate turbulence," he confessed, his voice quiet, stripped of its usual command. "Always have. My father was a pilot. You'd think I'd be used to it." He looked over at me, his eyes shadowed in the low light. "Thanks back there, for letting me hold your hand. I think it helped me as much as it helped you." I was stunned into silence. He, the pillar of calm and capability, had been scared too. He had been seeking comfort, not just offering it. The admission was a key turning a lock deep inside me. He wasn't just a masterpiece to be admired. He was a person, with fears and vulnerabilities just like mine. "I get nervous before these big pitches, too," he continued, almost to himself. "Feel like I'm going to be sick. Everyone expects me to have all the answers." In that dimly lit motel room, miles from the curated world of our office, he was no longer just Julian Vance, the founder. He was Julian, a man who felt the weight of expectation, who was afraid of falling. And my heart, my stupid, hopeless heart, ached for him with an intensity that was dizzying. The distance between us, the professional chasm, had shrunk to the few feet of floral bedspread that separated our bodies. The lamp was off. The only light came from the gap in the curtains, a thin, silvery line from the motel's neon sign. We lay in the dark, side by side, a rigid line of unspoken rules drawn down the center of the mattress. My body was a taut wire of tension. I was acutely aware of the warmth radiating from him, a heat that seemed to call to the cold loneliness I carried inside me. I stared at the ceiling, tracing the patterns of the water stains, listening to the sound of his breathing, slow and deep. I wondered if he was asleep. I couldn't be sure. Every nerve ending I had was on fire. I tried to shift, to find a more comfortable position, to ease the rigid set of my muscles. As I moved, my arm brushed against his. It was the briefest of contacts, skin against the cotton of his t-shirt, but it was enough. I froze, expecting him to pull away, to re-establish the fragile boundary between us. He didn't move. A beat of silence passed, a moment stretched into an eternity, filled with the sound of the rain outside and the frantic drumming of my own pulse. Then, slowly, deliberately, I felt the warmth of his hand cover mine. It wasn't an accident this time. His fingers were hesitant at first, a gentle pressure, a question asked in the universal language of touch. My breath hitched in my throat. This was it. The precipice. The point of no return. My mind was screaming 1,000 warnings, a chorus of every fear and insecurity I owned. He's your boss. It's a mistake. You're misreading this. But my body, my heart, had been starved for this connection for so long. I turned my hand over, my fingers lacing through his. I squeezed. It was my answer. A silent, terrified, hopeful yes. The mattress dipped as he shifted, turning onto his side to face me. His body was a wall of warmth in the cool air of the room. His face was a landscape of shadows and silver light, his eyes dark and unreadable. I could feel his breath on my cheek, warm and soft. He whispered my name. Elias. It wasn't a statement. It was a plea, a final question, a request for permission. My entire world, my entire carefully constructed, orderly, lonely life, hinged on this single moment. All the walls I had built, all the rules I had lived by, they were nothing more than dust in the face of this terrifying, beautiful reality. I could not speak. I could only watch as he leaned in, closing the final inch of distance between us. His lips met mine with a gentleness that shattered me. It was a slow, tentative kiss, searching and unsure at first, a question tasting of uncertainty and the faint, malty flavor of the beer we'd had hours before. Then, as I responded, as I leaned into the kiss, it deepened. It became something sure, something desperate, a release of all the unspoken tension, all the longing I had kept locked away in the quietest corners of my heart. It was like the moment a dam breaks. Everything I had held back, every secret observation, every hopeless fantasy, every ounce of yearning, came rushing forward in a single, overwhelming wave. My meticulously curated museum was flooded. The velvet ropes were washed away, the exhibits were knocked from their pedestals, and the carefully maintained silence was broken by the roaring in my ears. This was chaos. This was the terrifying, unpredictable mess of human connection I had spent my entire adult life avoiding. And it felt like breathing. It felt like coming home to a place I had never known existed. My hands, which had been frozen at my sides, came up to tangle in the soft fabric of his shirt, pulling him closer, wanting to erase any remaining space between us. The kiss ended, but he didn't pull away. He rested his forehead against mine, our breath mingling in the small space between our faces. The order was gone. My life was officially, irrevocably, in disarray. And in the silent, rain-swept darkness of that motel room, I had never felt more whole. I woke to the pale, gray light of dawn filtering through the gap in the curtains. For a disoriented moment, I didn't know where I was. Then it all came rushing back. The storm, the motel, Julian. His arm was draped possessively over my waist, his body a solid, warm weight against my back. His breathing was a slow, even rhythm against my neck. In the safety of sleep, the intimacy felt natural, right? But as consciousness returned, so did the fear. A cold, sharp panic began to bloom in my chest, creeping like frost through my veins. This was real. This had happened. I had kissed my boss. I had slept in his arms. The potential consequences crashed down on me with the force of a physical blow. I had just detonated a bomb in the middle of my carefully structured life. I had to get away. I had to put distance between us, to try and salvage some semblance of the old order. With painstaking slowness, I lifted his heavy arm from my waist and slipped out from under the covers. The cold air of the room was a shock against my skin. I dressed in the silence of the bathroom, my movements furtive, like a thief. When I emerged, he was awake, sitting up in the rumpled bed, his hair a mess, his eyes clouded with sleep. He looked at me, and the easy warmth of the previous night was gone, replaced by a thick, suffocating awkwardness. The air between us was charged with unspoken words, with regret and confusion. Or at least, that's what I projected onto it. My anxiety, which had been temporarily silenced by the shock and wonder of the night before, returned with a vengeance. It was a snarling, vicious beast, sinking its teeth into my every thought. It was a mistake, it whispered. A moment of weakness. You were both stressed, scared. It meant nothing. My mind began to build a narrative of rejection, a fortress of preemptive pain to protect myself. He was straight. This was a fluke, an aberration he was already regretting. He was my boss. I had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. I hadn't just ruined a potential friendship. I had jeopardized my career, the one part of my life where I felt competent and in control. I imagined the HR meeting, the quiet, pitying looks from my colleagues, the humiliation of having to pack up my desk. My internal monologue became a frantic, self-deprecating spiral. Of course this would happen to me. The one time I let my guard down, the one time I acted on a feeling instead of logic, it was in the most professionally suicidal way imaginable. It was a cosmic joke, and I was the punchline. Julian's behavior seemed to confirm my worst fears. He was distant, all business. He got dressed without a word, his movements efficient and clipped. He didn't look at me, his gaze fixed on his phone as he arranged our new flights. His voice, when he finally spoke, was the formal, authoritative voice of Julian Vance, CEO. We've got a flight out of Redmond at 11. We need to leave in 30 minutes. There was no trace of the vulnerable man who had confessed his fears to me in the dark. There was no trace of the man whose gentle kiss had turned my world on its axis. The emotional chasm between us felt wider and more impassable than the professional one had ever been. The drive to the new airport was a study in agonizing silence. I stared out the passenger window, watching the damp Oregon landscape slide by, feeling a familiar coldness settle back into my bones. The walls I thought had been demolished were already being rebuilt, brick by painful brick. This time, they felt higher, colder, and more permanent than ever before. I had touched the masterpiece, and now I was going to be ejected from the museum for good. We walked through the small regional airport in a bubble of strained silence. We checked our bags, went through security, and found our gate without exchanging more than a handful of necessary words. I was braced for the end. I was just waiting for him to find the right moment to deliver the blow, to tell me this was a mistake, and that it would be best if I started looking for a new job when we got back. We sat down in the uncomfortable plastic chairs of the waiting area, a careful foot of space between us. He stared at his phone. I stared at the flight information board. Then, he took a deep breath, a sound that seemed to suck all the air out of my immediate vicinity. He turned to me, his expression serious, his gray eyes finally meeting mine. "Elias," he said, his voice low and steady. "We need to talk about last night." My stomach plummeted. My heart felt like a cold, heavy stone in my chest. This was it, the moment of execution. I steeled myself for the rejection, for the professionally polite dismissal I was so sure was coming. I gave a small, barely perceptible nod, unable to form words. He looked away for a moment, gathering his thoughts. Then his gaze returned to mine, direct and unwavering. "I need you to know," he started, his voice softer now, "that last night was not a mistake. Not for me." The words didn't register at first. They were the opposite of everything my anxiety had been screaming at me for hours. I've wanted to do that for a very long time, my mind short-circuited. I could only stare at him, my mouth slightly agape. He continued, a torrent of confession that washed over me, dismantling my carefully constructed fears one by one. "I notice things, Elias. I see the way you get completely lost in your work. I see how you care about the details, how you bring so much quiet passion to everything you do. I've seen you in meetings, so focused and thoughtful, and I've wanted to know the person behind that focus." For months, he confessed that he had specifically arranged the trip so it would be just the two of us, hoping that outside the confines of the office, he might find a way to break through the professional barrier, to connect with me on a personal level. "The storm, the diversion, that was just chaotic luck," he said with a small, wry smile. "But I'm not sorry it happened." A thought, a single piece of the puzzle that had fueled my assumptions, surfaced in my bewildered mind. "Sarah." I managed to croak out, the name feeling foreign on my tongue. A look of confusion crossed his face before it cleared into understanding. "Sarah? My sister? He asked, and then he let out a short, soft laugh. God, is that what you thought? No. Sarah is my relentlessly meddling younger sister. She's been trying to set me up on blind dates for the past year. I keep telling her I'm not interested in the women she picks out. He shook his head, a look of profound relief on his face. I'm not interested in women at all. Elias, the floor didn't just drop out from under me. The entire building, the entire universe, seemed to rearrange itself around this new, stunning truth. Every assumption I had made, every wall I had built on the foundation of his perceived unavailability, crumbled into dust. The dam broke for the second time in less than 24 hours, but this time it wasn't a flood of passion, it was a flood of relief. The words tumbled out of me, a clumsy, earnest confession of my own. I told him everything. How I had watched him from afar, how I had cataloged the little details of his life, how I had convinced myself he was a masterpiece in a museum, something to be admired but never touched. I told him how certain I was that he was straight, that he was my boss, that I was nothing more than a quiet employee to him. I told him how terrified I had been that morning, how I was sure I had ruined everything. As I spoke, the weight that had been sitting on my chest for so long began to lift, replaced by a feeling so light and buoyant it felt like I might float away. He listened to every word, his expression softening, his eyes full of a warmth and understanding that I had only ever dreamed of. When I finally ran out of words, a comfortable silence settled between us. He reached out, his hand covering mine where it rested on my knee. This time, there was no hesitation, no uncertainty. It was a gesture of pure, solid reassurance. So, just to be clear, he said, his thumb stroking the back of my hand, the same grounding gesture from the plane. You're not planning on quitting on Monday? A laugh escaped me, a sound of pure, unadulterated joy. No, I said, my voice thick with emotion. No, I'm not, he smiled, that genuine, crinkle-eyed smile I had admired from a distance for so long. And right there, in a quiet corner of a nondescript airport terminal, surrounded by the mundane sounds of boarding calls and rolling suitcases, Julian Vance leaned in and kissed me again. This kiss was different from the first. It wasn't questioning or tentative. It was sure. It was deep and full of relief, a confirmation of every word we had just spoken. It wasn't the chaos of a dam breaking. It was the feeling of a river finally finding its way to the sea. It felt like coming home. The flight back was a world away from the flight out. We sat side by side, a quiet, electric current flowing between us. Our hands were clasped together on the armrest, hidden from view by our jackets. Every so often, he would squeeze my hand, a silent reassurance that this was real, that I wasn't dreaming. We landed back in a world that was familiar, but everything felt different. The city looked brighter, the air cleaner. We agreed, in the car on the way back from the airport, to keep things quiet at work, at least for a little while. The idea of navigating the professional and the personal simultaneously was daunting, and we wanted to give this fragile, new thing between us space to grow without the pressure of office gossip. The first few days back at the office were a delicious secret. We were once again Julian, the boss, and Elias, the designer, but now there was a hidden layer to our interactions. A shared glance across a conference table held a world of meaning. A brief email about a project would end with a line that was just for me. He walked past my desk, and the scent of his cologne was no longer a source of painful yearning, but a secret promise. Our first real date was that Friday. We met at a quiet Italian restaurant far from our usual neighborhoods, a neutral territory where we could exist simply as Julian and Elias. The professional personas we wore at the office were shed at the door. He told me about his childhood in a small town, his failed attempts to build a bookshelf that didn't wobble, and his secret love for old, black and white monster movies. I found myself opening up in a way I never had with anyone. I told him about my passion for vintage typography, about the children's book I secretly dreamed of illustrating one day. I even told him about my anxiety, about the walls I built, and how he, without even knowing it, had been slowly dismantling them for months. He didn't flinch or look away. He just listened, his gaze steady and kind, making me feel seen in a way that was both terrifying and exhilarating. We were learning the textures of each other's lives, the details that existed outside of blueprints and design briefs. The connection between us, which had been forged in the crucible of fear and uncertainty, was now being tempered and strengthened in the gentle warmth of conversation and shared vulnerability. A few weeks later, I was at his apartment. It was nothing like my own meticulously ordered space. It was warm, lived in, and full of character. Books were stacked on every available surface. Sketches and architectural drawings were pinned to a large corkboard, and a half-finished wooden birdhouse sat on his workbench, a testament to his charmingly imperfect carpentry skills. It was the home of a man who was not afraid of a little beautiful chaos. A thunderstorm rolled in that evening, the sky outside the large picture window turning a bruised purple. The lights flickered once, twice, then went out, plunging the apartment into darkness, save for the intermittent flashes of lightning. For a second, a ghost of my old panic stirred. Then, I felt his arm wrap around me, pulling me against his side on the sofa. He leaned in, his lips close to my ear. "Well?" he murmured, his voice a low, warm rumble against the sound of the rain. "At least we have separate rooms this time." I laughed, a full, easy sound. The callback to that night in the motel, the shared memory that was ours alone, felt like another brick being laid in the foundation of our new reality. It wasn't a wall to keep the world out. It was the foundation of a home. Later that night, lying in his bed, listening to the steady rhythm of the rain against the glass and the even steadier rhythm of his heart beating against my ear, I thought about the museum my life used to be. It had been so quiet, so safe, so predictable. I had curated my solitude with such care, believing that control was the same as happiness. I had been wrong. The turbulence I had feared so much, the literal and emotional storm that had thrown my life into chaos, hadn't destroyed me. It had saved me. It had shattered the glass, torn down the walls, and forced me out of the sterile silence of my own exhibition. It had broken my world open just enough to let someone else in. Julian stirred in his sleep, his arm tightening around me, pulling me closer. I closed my eyes, breathing in his scent, feeling the solid, grounding warmth of his body next to mine. The old walls were gone, reduced to rubble, and for the first time in my life, I felt no desire to rebuild them. I was finally, truly, out of the museum and living in the beautiful, unpredictable, chaotic world. And I was not alone.